Jason Brown, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Born and raised pretty much in California. Lived in a few different states, but eventually came back here. But just a normal dude.
I love the story of how we connected. We were going through a very similar situation at the same exact time, and it was really cool to bond at the level that we did, just really sharing lessons learned in our experience. And it was a really fast connection. And I wanted to share your experience outward. Your background's really cool. Everyone knows a lot of people know about attachment theory, and something that's very unique to you is that you've been able to transition through all three attachment styles throughout your life, starting with being avoidant in your teens and in your 20s, and then eventually becoming more anxious, and now also working through securely attached qualities and tendencies. So I wanted to get some information from you about when you started realizing you were avoidant and the steps that you took to start addressing that, and then the transition to being anxious.
Yeah. So the first thing I noticed was in my relationship when I was 17, my first real relationship. My high school girlfriend. Dated for about 2 years. And that was the time, without getting into too much detail, when I noticed my tendency to wall up and get uncomfortable with real close intimacy. Not physical, but a deeper emotional bond. That was when I really noticed it. So, go through that, right? I noticed these strange kind of habits that I was starting to do when that closeness would become, prevalent. It was a lot more intimate, a lot more emotional closeness. I would actually begin to wall up, and begin to start fights to try to give myself space, right? Because, most avoidant people don't really know how to communicate their needs. So, I did the same thing. I would almost start a fight so that I can use that fight to give myself space, and then use that as an excuse, like, oh, I disappeared because I needed to cool down, right? So things like that. And then, trying to sabotage it, right? Because, in my head, I'm like, oh, I want freedom. I want this, but I don't know how to communicate any of that, right? I'm not good with feelings at that moment. So you just try to subconsciously get what you want by acting a certain way and then letting it die out from there. So, after things led up to that, I ended up breaking up with her. And then, so the story after this, when I got really bad, right? That was just when I first noticed it. I got really bad when, my grandmother got sick, and I actually ended up having to take care of her until she passed away. So, that happened when I was 19. So very shortly after that, I broke up with her when I was 18. So literally within a year, all this happened. So from 18 to 20 was like a crazy, crazy time in life emotionally for me. From that point was when I got super, super bad as far as avoidance goes. I'd get into relationships, um, almost with the mindset that I was broken from the get-go, right? So I would get into these relationships and go, I know something's wrong with me. This is just a matter of time before they figure it out, right? And what was wrong with me was just like just absolute lack of emotional, just knowledge of myself, right? I had no emotional awareness, didn't know how to express myself, didn't know how to ask for needs, didn't know how to really ask for somebody else's needs either. So I'd get into relationships, and I would, start off strong, right? Start off how I normally would, romantic. I'm decently chivalrous, right? So I would start off very caring, very thoughtful. And then, just after a certain point, it would just feel like just 180. So I'd get to this point where I was like, I'm done. Like, this is too much. Right. And it was just more of like I would almost call it like emotional laziness, where I was like, I'm just done putting in effort. I'm done. Just go find someone else. And it was like, it was easy to do that because I went into it knowing I felt defective. Right. So I go into these things and I'm like, I'm broken. You seem normal. So let's just have fun while it lasts. As soon as this, wears off, let's just leave. Right. So that was my mentality of just like, cool. As soon as it's not fun anymore, on to the next. So I did that for a long time, right? Long time. I would, I think there 1 year, I probably slept with maybe 30 women, right? All in the promises of like, yeah, no, we're a thing. And it was, just all at the same time. I was just juggling all these different, little mini situationships. And it felt good at the time, right? It kind of boosts your ego and all this, but, it was one of those things where it's like, man, this is a bad pattern. Like, I know something's wrong, right? I go into every one of these things and I'm like, well, this is going to be fun while it lasts, right? That was my mentality, right? I didn't really have the introspection yet to really be like, something's wrong with me. It was more like, let's just see how long this goes. So I came on almost thinking like it's a roller coaster. Like, I'm just going to ride this roller coaster and soon it's over, right? I'm just on to the next one. So I kind of just developed this, not like I'm using people, but I was like, cool, you're just fun for the moment, right? I had no intentions of anything long term, of like real intimacy. And, but I would tell you that, right? I would, because at the moment I was like, yeah, I could, right? It's always the possibility of it. But then when it became a reality, I was like, nope, right? I'm not doing this. So, I think it was around maybe 25, right? A few years ago. I had kind of just had this trail of just heartbreaks, right? I'd have exes reach out, just kind of reminisce on these things. And, that's when I understood. I was like, something's wrong, right? Like something that's not correct. And, that's when I looked, kind of deeper inside and was like, okay, the common denominator is me. Right? I can't just be like, oh, they're all crazy, right? The common denominator was me in all of this. So, I had to really take a step back and be like, cool, I'm not going to see anybody. I'm going to just work on this. Right. So as I worked on that, I realized what the root of it was. I kind of made this persona, right? It wasn't really who I was. I just lived this persona of like, I'm just this, I don't do feelings. I'm just cool. Don't bother me with your feelings. I don't have feelings, so just leave it alone. Right. So I developed this persona that I clung to, but, really that's not the case at all. I'm the absolute opposite of that. Not necessarily a softie, but I'm very, I'm a feely guy, right? I have emotions and all that, but at that time, that's what I clung to. So, I was, my real self was attached to this persona, right? So I'm just going through this destructive cycle. So once I kind of figured that out and realized like, okay, this is not me, right? A lot of that avoidance went away where I became comfortable expressing myself and be like, this is me, right? I'm gonna live life as me now, right? I'm gonna be vulnerable. I'm gonna express myself. I'm gonna allow people in, right? That was a big thing. So I'm gonna allow people to show me affection, and it's not like some dangerous thing. It's not like this attack on my freedom. It's nothing like that. Because a healthy person can accept intimacy, but set boundaries. Like, hey, I need this day. I'm going to do this, right? You can healthily set those boundaries. But when you don't know how to do that, you assume everything is an attack on your freedom. So once I kind of got that out of the way, I became super anxious because for the first time in my life, I was experiencing intimacy without any of the guards that I had put up. So now it's like this overwhelming sense of, not like love, but like that, closeness. So I was feeling this closeness really deeply. So, like anything, something feels really good, you latch on to it. All right. So for a while, I was, first time in my head was like, oh, this is healthy, right? Like I'm feeling something good. I'm allowing them in. I'm reciprocating it. But then it became like overbearing where I'm like, you're my source of happiness. You're my source of, like, if our conversations aren't going well today, my day's not good. Right. So it became very dependent. Um, and then, did that for not that long, right? I realized actually it's harder for anxious people. I would say when I was avoidant, it was easy, right? Avoidance is easy because you just are like, cool, next, next, next. But when you're anxious, you really attach to someone, like you stick to them. So, I was doing that for a while and I was like, this is exhausting, right? Like why this is worse than what I was before. And I had no idea what this was called, right? I didn't have any idea what attachment theory was. I'm labeling this as I look back on it. But I'm doing this and I'm like getting like super, not obsessive, but I'm like, hey, like, who are you with? Where are you going? What time are you home? I'm like, text me when you're home, right? And I would stay up until I got that text message. So it's like I became like that, like helicopter. And I was like, okay, that's not good either because this is exhausting, right? It is exhausting to be that way. So then I worked on understanding what that was about as well, and realized like, okay, I can't, use this person to soothe myself, right? I need to, something has to be internal where I'm not projecting that on other people, right? So as I, discovered what that was and, worked on myself in that way, now, the two ends that I was at, the extreme end of avoidance and the other extreme end of anxiousness came right in the middle where it's like, okay, this is way more relaxing. This is more natural feeling. I'm not, avoiding everything and bouncing as soon as it gets tough, but I'm also not like clinging on with everything I have. So it's this delicate balance of the in between is where, I've worked to be at now. And, of course you kind of bounce between, in smaller ways, but generally I'd say I've gone through that journey to become a lot more secure now.
I love that. And my question to you is, what did you find was the biggest difference and trade-offs from the two attachment styles going from one extreme to the other? What was the most difficult for both ends of the two spectrums for you?
I think the most difficult, uh, from both ends, I'd say the hardest part, I talk about getting too secure from both ends. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the avoidance, I believe, is a deeper issue. That is a much deeper issue now that I've experienced both ends. I actually believe that anxiousness can be cured pretty, not easily, but it's the road to being, to healing is a lot shorter. I think avoidance comes from a lot of insecurity, and they both do. All right, but from avoidance, it was like it takes a lot of introspection, and I think that's what makes people avoidant is because that introspection is very difficult. Where I think actually anxious people by default are introspective and they assume like I need you because I'm missing something. Where avoidance on the other hand are almost like I don't need you, right? I'm complete without you, right? So stuff like that where um from both ends is a journey, but the hardest part, when you're on that end of the spectrum is going to be the introspection, so avoidance, if you're trying to become secure, it's going to be that rough time of introspection. And it's going to be rough because, most avoidants probably have a trail of broken hearts behind them, or anxious people are usually the opposite, where they're the ones that are going through the heartbreaks most of the time. So, I'd say from an avoidant perspective, you have to do that introspection. Like there's no other way. There's no one's going to really teach it to you. Cause they try, like most partners actually do try. And that's actually what pushes you deeper into it is when they try and they're like, you're attacking me, you're criticizing me, you're saying something's wrong with me, right? So they just shell up. Where the anxious person almost wants to hear those things because to them it's a sign of like, oh, they care, they're trying. So it's like it's that, it's the opposites there. And so I think that's my opinion on, healing from the avoidance side, but from the anxious side, it's like really pulling that into yourself. I think that's that's hard as well. But it's a lot more of it's an innocent journey, right? Instead of the avoidance where you have to really also accept that you've probably broken a lot of hearts, where the anxious person, you're more going to look at it like, okay, I've probably pushed people away. Where when you pull that, crazy energy that you put into somebody else back into yourself, then it makes people comfortable coming up to you because they know like you're not going to latch onto them. You're not going to be like super crazy, over every little thing. So people are going to be more open to, coming up to you and opening up to you again. So it's very similar. It's just on the other end of the spectrum, but I think.